So I was this week watching. I sought out this documentary about the Mokele-Mbembe. So the Mokele-Mbembe is a rumored dinosaur in the Congo. And I had found this documentary from, let's see, what year was it? I want to say it was like 2001. About the Mokele-Mbembe and the Congo, and it was kind of a disappointment. Like, I watched it, and it starts off with this really cool clip that I'm going to show you here.
Oh, and that is so definitively swimming and so very large. That's not something stationary. It's leaving a wake.
So, I don't understand why this footage is black and white, because it's shot in 92 by this Japanese expedition. I guess that's the film they had. As far as I can tell, this was not for dramatic effect, and I can't find this film anywhere else. And this is Lake Tele in the Congo, which is surrounded by thick, swampy brush. Like, they call it like the dark heart of Africa, because you cannot navigate through this stuff. And they apparently catch something swimming in the lake here. And yeah, doesn't that look kind of like a long neck?
Yeah.
Oh, 100%. It's, I mean, like, the water. The water, it tells everything in this, man. That lake's not moving. There's no motion in that lake, and that's a long, very long
Well,
lake.
I've seen other videos where they reenact this. They try to build something out of wood. They did different, experiments and stuff, and they tried to pull it behind a boat. They couldn't get anything like what this video looked like.
Like trying to reproduce a lake monster. Yeah, I mean, it's grainy footage, so it's hard to say. But given the depth of this lake and where this thing was at, I could make the argument that this looks like an elephant's shadow, right? Or an elephant's outline.
I forgot elephants existed until you said that. Now that's all I can see.
Now it looks like an elephant, right? But given its location on the lake, an elephant out that far, elephants are heavy. Elephants don't really swim, As far as I'm aware, I don't think they go in deep water.
I'm not sure about that. I don't know.
So, to take you along my journey, I see this clip, I find this video, I watch this documentary, and by the end of the documentary, it is somewhat disappointing because they talk to these, they're the Bayaka pygmies, and they show them a book of different animals. And I've seen this done before where they show them books of different animals, and it might not be the Bayaka, it might be other pygmy groups, because they're really the only ones that are out in the jungle in terms of tribes. Like, there are more civilized people in towns along the river. But, I mean, these guys are living a very primitive lifestyle out there.
Is that a case maybe of language drift, where the original legend spurred as that, and it just drifted down to them in this generation describing that rhinoceros as that?
So I very much appreciate you bringing that up. Marty says elephants can swim for up to 6 hours completely submerged with just their trunks for air.
You're telling me they snorkel?
Yeah, that's what it sounds like.
Snorkel champions of the world.
I mean, that's
no
pretty
idea.
wild. Now, there are forest elephants in these areas. What there are not, as far as anyone knows, is rhinoceros. So, in terms of this being potential language drift, like playing a game of telephone, right? He's talking to specifically the Bayaka pygmies from different regions, and they're all looking at this rhinoceros and going, that's what it is. Well, and the forest elephant are very elusive in the area, but we're talking about these pygmies that live a tribal existence out there in this brush all the time. So they can identify different animals pretty easily. You would think they're very, of course, they're in tune with the nature that's around them. They know what large animals are around there, even when they are stealthy.
They're proficient in the brush.
Exactly. Incredibly proficient. Like, you wish you could be as proficient as they are. Like, they have essentially what amounts to like 10-hour work weeks. It's not what you think it is in terms of difficulty. So whether or not that's an elephant, the scale of that in Lake Tele looks very huge. And the forest elephants tend to be smaller than their like savanna cousins.
Yeah, that was very, very large in that lake. That was an immense object.
I'm left from this documentary feeling kind of let down because they show these Bayaka pygmies saying it's just a rhinoceros. They're all pointing at the rhinoceros. So I start to try to do a little bit more research, and I almost abandon this as a topic until I do. And I start to go back to the source and try to find what were the original accounts of the Mokele-Mbembe.
Yeah.
What are you guys thinking about this so far while I'm getting this run in?
I think it is plausible, like I said at the beginning of this, if there is a place that something like that is going to be living undiscovered and undisturbed by modern society, it is going to be in the dense middle nowheres of Africa, 110%.
I agree. And there's been too many other videos where they tried to recreate it and it just didn't work.
Well, I can tell you, it is not just the dangers of the environment when you're going to this area, but it's the political danger. In the Congo, you are liable to be shot if you're on the wrong side of the river, and it could be the wrong side of the river, could be both sides of the river.
Absolutely.
The idea that you're gonna just walk through the Congo unharmed is pretty ridiculous. It is a politically,
Bolsters?
yeah, to say the least. It's the last place you want to be politically. That you're gonna get killed likely. So a lot of these expeditions, you'll see this over and over again, that they get turned around for different reasons. Let me try
Or
this again
maybe
now here.
the Congo government is stopping the expedition so no one finds out about the giant African dinosaurs.
So this is the first guy that I can find who has some documentation on the Mokele-Mbembe, and it's from 1913. He leads this expedition to what is now the Northern Republic of Congo. He ends up forced to turn back because the First World War breaks out in about 1914. And although the term Mokele-Mbembe originally came from the people of the area, he was the first one to spell it. You want to take a shot at reading that name? Because I don't really want to. Ludwig Freiherr von Steen zu Lausnitz?
Yeah, you did good, because
How'd I do?
I couldn't have said any of that. Ludwig
Freiherr von
von
Stein zu Lausnitz?
Yeah, there you go. I don't know.
So this guy was a German colonial officer. And apparently he came out of retirement to do this expedition. I believe I had read that. Could be wrong on that point. But ultimately, his stuff doesn't get published until like 1948 by this other guy. It changes hands a couple of times and gets his Willy Ley. And Willy Ley has this book, apparently, The Dodo, the Lungfish, and the Unicorn in 1948. And in 48, he publishes these written accounts of what Ludwig had to say. So,
the creature is reported not to live in the smaller rivers like the two Liquilas, and in the rivers mentioned only a few individuals are said to exist. At the time of our expedition, a specimen was reported from the non-navigable part of the Sangha River, somewhere between the two rivers Mbayo and Pikunda, unfortunately in a part of the river that could not be explored due to the brusque end of our expedition. We also heard about the alleged animal at the Esambo River. The narratives of the natives result in a general description that runs as follows. The animal is said to be of a brownish-grey colour with a smooth skin, its size approximately that of an elephant, at least that of a hippopotamus. It is said to have a long and very flexible neck and only one tooth, but a very long one. Some say it is a horn. A few spoke about a long muscular tail like that of an alligator. Canoes coming near it are said to be doomed. The animal is said to attack the vessels at once and to kill the crews, but without eating the bodies. The creature is said to live in the caves that have been washed out by the river in the clay of its shores at sharp bends. It is said to climb the shore even at daytime in search of food. Its diet is said to be entirely vegetable. This feature disagrees with a possible explanation as a myth. The preferred plant was shown to me. It is a kind of liana with large white blossoms, with a milky sap and apple-like fruits. At the Esambo River I was shown a path said to have been made by this animal in order to get at its food. The path was fresh, and there were plants of the described type nearby. But since there were too many tracks of elephants, hippos, and other large mammals, it was impossible to make out a particular spoor with any amount of certainty.
So, I just want to note a couple of things here on this quote. One is the idea that it's an herbivore. The size of its neck is another thing. Because as you were speaking to earlier, is, what did you call it? Like
Language drift.
language drift. Right. So in the 80s, and I'm not going to get to that case yet today, but the expeditions that were launched uncovered various other animals, because they were classified as animals by these people, that had different traits that were also cryptids, are also cryptids. And one of them looks a whole lot like a rhinoceros.
Yeah.
So is it possible that there could still be a rhinoceros and the name has drifted? They had a separate name for the thing that looked like a rhinoceros. I also wanted to note real quick that artist in the background, I believe this is Charles Knight, one of my favorite paleo artists. This background, not the foreground. He's done a lot of work for museums, including the Chicago Field Museum. A lot of classical or very early paleo art, which is very cool. So in 1934, we get this other account written to the Avenir Colonial Belge article. Some anonymous Belgian in 1934 reads this. That's Charles Knight.
They call it the Sankey. When they describe it, the blacks tell you it exceeds the tallest trees. The body is like that of a formidable ox, with a large tail. Its neck is immense and ends in a rather small head on which it has a large crest like a cockscomb. It dwells in the swamps and swims at a very great speed. In Kazai, I even heard of a native chief who jealously guarded the tail of a brontosaur.
I want to meet that chief.
Yeah.
I want to see his brontosaur tail.
I would jealously guard it as well.
I would
honestly.
too. I don't blame the guy, honestly. If I had a brontosaur tail, I would be all about guarding it. I don't know how I would preserve it. If I would desiccate it, or if I would flash freeze it.
Both solid options.
I'd probably talk to that Masan guy about it.
Uh-huh.
So here we have another case of an article in the periodical Umschau. Leo von Boxberger. He's a German magistrate from 1938. So, again, these are all very early cases.
You know that picture, the more I see pictures and renditions of this, the more it makes sense to me that it's something that's feasible, because if you think about the area that it's in, there's not like there's giraffes or anything to compete with tall food.
True.
It is the only thing competing with tall food, and with the size and stature that it is, it's not like it's gonna have any difficulty dealing with the current run of natural predators in an area like that. So it would be almost uncontested for survival.
Well, and one thing that I would note of both of these pictures, both the background picture, Charles Knight picture, as well as the one in the foreground, they show these sauropod dinosaurs in water. It's now believed that this was a misinterpretation of their biology, but they believed they were so big that they couldn't really walk on land, that they must have been a very aquatic, or at least semi-aquatic species, which has largely gone out the window now. They don't really believe that of the sauropods nowadays. But, all right, so let's listen to this guy's account real quick.
My own contribution to the subject is unfortunately very small. At the mouth of Mbembe in Sanaga in central Cameroons and on the NT in southern Cameroons, I collected a variety of data from the natives about the mysterious water beast. But alas, all my notes, and also the local description of the animal, were lost in Spanish Guinea when the Pangwat attacked the caravan carrying my few belongings. All that I can report is the name Mokele-Mbembe given to the animal in southern Cameroons.
Mokele-Mbembe.
The belief in a gigantic water animal, described as a reptile with a long thin neck, exists among the natives throughout the southern Cameroons, wherever they form part of the Congo basin, and also to the west of this area. doubtless wherever the great rivers are broad and deep and are flanked by virgin forest. This belief seems to be widespread throughout the Congo basin. The monster is herbivorous and mainly feeds on the luxuriant aquatic vegetation of this region. To do this, it does not come out of the water until after sunset. Its preferred habitat is in places where, as a result of the force of the current, deep and peaceful creeks have formed. These are the features common to all indigenous stories of this kind.
So again, we're talking about something very aquatic and herbivore.
What's interesting about
Long neck.
this note is that all of these descriptions of it are exactly like you're saying, and they're all the same, and they're coming from disparate tribes that aren't necessarily all connected through family or politics or religion or anything of that nature. Tribes that may even often be at war at each other and be slandering the other's religion at the time. And mythology, things like this kind of fit under that umbrella as well. So it wouldn't be, in my eyes, very likely that these tribes would be coming to the same conclusions
Right.
in a disparate fashion if there wasn't some kind of underlying
Something
creature
that they
there.
both saw that was real,
Exactly.
to them at least.
Well, and I'm going to pull up a map of the area when we're done here, just to kind of show you the region a little bit from what I can show you. And you're right, these tribes aren't always in contact with each other. They live in small groups, so you have different names for things. Even there might be a tribe that doesn't. Again, that's where that language drift happens. So I'll try to find. I don't have it pulled up right now, but I'll try to find the one that looks like a rhino that was also documented, the other cryptid,
Gotcha.
which probably is just a rhino. My guess would be Occam's razor, that there's probably some rhinos that managed to survive in the Congo. That's never been proven, but we'll find out.
I would imagine.
So this guy, Pierre Alexandre, French anthropologist and linguist, has this account in around 1960.
During a tour of the DJ, discovered that the Zaman people refused to
It's not
take
a
their
direct
canoes
quote.
out onto the open water of the river out of fear of an unnamed monster. This animal was described as having a long neck, at least as long as 6 Alexandre's leg, a head like a big turtle, hard or scaly skin, and a body initially compared to a car, a machine with which the Zaman were only cursorily familiar. Pressed further on the monster's size, they stated that it was much larger than a 200-liter gasoline barrel, but smaller than an elephant. It was alleged to live in deep water, coming out only during the night, and left tracks the shape and size of a large paddle. While it did not eat people, it was feared for its habit of overturning canoes and drowning the occupants.
So I believe the Mokele-Mbembe actually means something like one who stops rivers or something like that. So in this, we're getting a very similar description. It says as long as 6 foot his leg. What I'm reading there's like his leg plus at least another 6 feet. And they talk about its body and its size. So we're not necessarily talking about the largest sauropod on the planet that we know of. Like, this thing actually sounds pretty small for something that would be like a plesiosaur or a sauropod.
No, and it makes sense for them not to be the same size as it would be if it had an evolutionary ancestor in the dinosaurs, especially, oxygen levels have gone down. I imagine that
It just wouldn't be advantageous to something to be that big today. I don't believe. And this all the accounts of its size, it's big, but it's not like Megasaurus or
it's not a walking house.
Yeah, exactly. It's more like a walking car.
I mean, it could be the same reason why we don't have giants anymore.
Yeah.
Like giant people, like what they've found before. Times have changed. Like you said, the air's changed.
Say it again.
When?
When? It's just when. Here, when? He was in French Equatorial Africa. I believe he was stationed there between 58 and 59.
According to the tradition transmitted by the parents of their parents, in these swamps of Lake Telel would live a beast that looks like an enormous pangolin. They told me that if it crossed the arm of the Lokala oak herbs at the post of Erpina, Its tail would still drag on the shore as its head and its forelegs would have reached opposite bank, which would give it a length of 20 meters.
So I don't know about the pangolin connection there, but just to give you some idea of the size of the thing, I think it's an interesting account. Not a whole lot of value there besides that. Then we have Waldfried Ted Roth. He was the general curator of the Smithsonian National Zoological Park. This is somewhere near OME River in 1959.
Roth's Wasi guides refused to cross a swamp for fear
Again,
of
not
this
a direct
animal.
quote.
The MK assured you possibly a contraction of Mokele-Mbembe. Upon returning to a nearby village, the local chief, who spoke poor English, told him that the swamp was home to water elephants, which were not related to normal elephants. He described these animals as far larger than elephants, with a long neck described as a trunks coming out of the body featuring a small head, flat paddle-like forelimbs, and a long whip-like tail. The Mokele-Mbembe was not supposed to kill men feeding on herbs and small trees, but it would trample them to death. Roth drew a picture of a manatee for the chief, who said that the body of the Mokele-Mbembe was similar, but the neck was much longer, and the head was more like that of a monitor lizard.
Interesting. So it's got quite a lot of accounts coming from quite a few time periods here, and this is only what we've been through.
Yeah, well, this is like the 60s now.
Yeah, about 50, 60
So,
years.
We started, really less. It was started in 1912. We're in the 60s. So we're 40 years or 50 years. What I think is interesting here is about this this language drift. You know, he talks about it being called the Mokele-Mbembe, MKNB, which he believes is a reference to the Mokele-Mbembe.
Yeah.
In other words, he's talking to maybe not the exact same group of people, and they have a similar name for it, but it might not be the exact name for it. This is something that I found. This is again from the, I believe they were the Mokele expeditions, and I had managed to find this book, In Search of Prehistoric Survivals. Do Giants Still Exist? Or Giant Creatures Still Exist by Carl P.N. Schuker. And this is a picture of the author with an apparent footprint or cast, plaster cast of a Mokele-Mbembe footprint.
Well, I'll tell you, that doesn't look like any footprint of anything that I know. It looks like a big frog.
It does kind of look like a frog.
Well, and this is where we start to get into the more modern stuff, and I'm not necessarily prepared to do that, so that's where we're going to leave it. But in terms of my question, why am I disappointed that there was some sort of drift between the language? At least was it a language drift? Perfect term.
Feels
I'm
like
so
there
glad
was
you said
something
that.
there, and it feels like there was. I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off.
No,
Go ahead.
no. You're 100% right. I think there was a language drift. I think that's what explains it.
It feels like it's almost a regional drift too. Like these
Mhm.
tribes had maybe a common tribe a long time ago, or one or two that they split off from. They fractured and splintered into several different groups, and that legend carried throughout. When we see legends like this, like urban legends specifically, even though this isn't like urban legend's a misnomer, but it's that same kind of mythological presence that an urban legend would carry in our society, something like Mothman, where it kind of carries through, and it plays a game of telephone from generation to generation, but it's still enriched or entrenched culturally into that small sect of people throughout the generations, even if they're split off from that original one.
Yep, and I think I just found it here. Okay. So this is another cryptid that the people of this area talk about.
Oh, rhinoceros.
Tell me that doesn't look like a rhinoceros. Or something like a rhino.
It looks like a rhino dog.
So
Killer of elephants, or eater of the tops of trees. Eater of the tops of trees makes that interesting to me. Because that feels like some language drift too. Like there's a reason that documentary said that, because that thing does not look like it could eat from the tops of trees.
Right.
Do you know what does? Mokele-Mbembe.
Right. So this was a documented cryptid during the Mokele expeditions, which is something I want to dive deeper into, but without going entirely into it tonight. Suffice it to say, this is the list of other cryptids that were documented on this expedition. Who is to say that the myth of Mokele-Mbembe hasn't somewhat transferred into the myth of this, which is really just a rhinoceros, through language drift over generations? That would be my guess of what's happening there, because the reality is the Bayaka pygmies that they're talking to in that documentary aren't the only people who have myths of the Mokele-Mbembe. And I think they are one of many regionally who do. So the names can easily be swapped, for lack of a better term, between different cultures. What one culture may call Mokele-Mbembe, another culture may call this. I did want to share this, which was an apparent recording of a Mokele-Mbembe.
Interesting.
Yeah, I believe it was the Rudsters expedition. Just for the sake of sharing media, here is a audio recording.
I hear the like guttural noise, but it sounds like they're in a plane almost.
I was gonna say it sounds like a train.
Like that's a lot of background noise.
Well, if you listen very closely, you can hear it say, "I am Mokele-Mbembe."
Oh.
I also wanted to share this photo, which was also from the Regusters expedition. Again, just for the sake of sharing media, don't have much of a story behind it to report to you, but this is going into more of the modern era. I believe
that
it was
picture.
the 80s expedition. Again, interesting one. I don't know what we're looking at.
It's got a vibe to it. That
Yeah.
is either it's either Mokele-Mbembe or a dead body.
Well, I feel like in the Sasquatch world, you would call this all blob squatches, you know?
Yeah.
But we're talking about an animal or a species that can exist only in a very small space in the world. A very hard to get to space, a very deadly to get to space. So here are apparent Mokele-Mbembe sightings.
Can we zoom out and see?
Yep.
Yeah.
To show you where we're at in Africa. We're very near the equator in the Congo, in the dark heart of Africa. And I mean, the reason why I pulled up the satellite here is just so you can see the vegetation and how dense the environment becomes. So these are apparently ones in the southeast. And then we have a few sightings in the northeast, which I believe this is closer to the Cameroon. Now, the focal point of most of these investigations have been Lake Tele. So, I mean, it's not like we're familiar with Africa, so that's Africa. Everybody recognizes that, right?
No.
Here's Lake Tele.
Why is it such a perfect hole in the ground?
It's kind of freaky, right?
Looks like a monster.
So these rivers, I had read one account where they talked about this Ipina being the center of some of those 80s expeditions, seemed to be the cultural center of where people were most aware of this Mokele-Mbembe. And on a number of these expeditions, they want to make it out to Lake Tele, and they don't numerous times, just because it's so impossible to get to. But they talk about the people who live along the river knowing of it, but they essentially inform you, you need to go talk to the pygmies out in the brush. They're the ones who really know about it. We just kind of have this awareness of it. Although you do find people who say they've seen them. But in this kind of environment, I mean, like, there's no road.
No,
Good
there's
luck
no way
ever
through.
finding a road.
And everything in those trees, it is trying to kill you.
Oh yeah.
I mean, okay, those are big trees, right? This lake is huge.
This lake's huge. It's a very big lake. Well, and it's surrounded by what is essentially swampland, you know? Look at this picture. This picture alone is impressive. Just to give a feeling for the environment here. So if ever there was a possibility of, and the reality is, I don't think this thing is a sauropod. I think we might be talking about a plesiosaur, or let's be real, let's talk about convergent evolution. The idea that maybe this thing is closer related to an elephant. So you know what the closest living relative to an elephant is?
I don't.
A manatee. The closest
Interesting.
living relative of a manatee is an elephant. Ironically, an elephant shrew is closer related to an elephant than a shrew. But that's a whole nother story. There are situations in evolution where something fills an ecological niche with a completely different set of genetics. There's something like a hedgehog that's closer related to an elephant than a hedgehog or any other rodent. Other than maybe like the elephant shrew, because it was isolated on an island, and eventually those genetics filled that ecological gap and made something that looked like a hedgehog, even though it's not related to a hedgehog at all. So my point is, if elephants can be in this area, and we know elephants are related to manatees and are kind of an isolated tree of life, who's to say that this thing isn't something like a manatee? Because in one of those accounts, I don't know if it was one of the ones I played, but they talk about showing them a manatee, and they say, yeah, it's like that, but it's got a really long neck.
Yeah, they did. You did show that one.
Is it possible that this could be something that lives in very small groups or in a very, very small population and is more related to an elephant than it is a sauropod or a plesiosaur, which I think it would probably be more like a plesiosaur given its size and hiding in the water. Sauropods weren't likely to be hiding in water. Could this be something that has some sort of convergent evolution to look like a plesiosaur but is closer related to something like an elephant?
I think you might be on something.
And does it even still exist? You know, it seems to be these accounts that it did exist 100 years ago. This region is so untouched, you would think it would still exist, but
it wouldn't be the first species we've had go extinct in the past 100 years.
right. Although it does seem like its environment is largely untouched. I mean, looking at this photography, it's pretty, you're kind of expecting to see a dinosaur pop out at you.
You're trekking around in Jurassic Park.
Mm-hmm.
You know, out of all the various different lake monsters, I put the most probability in this one being legitimate.
Well, it has good vegetation. It has places to eat. Nobody's bothering it.
I don't think much outside of people could bother it in that lake anyway. None of the animals there are going to be trekking into its environment to try and get at it, so don't go to the Congo, but if you do,
Probably not where you want to hang out.
If you do, let me know. Give me that video footage, alright?
Yeah, we want to know about the Mokele-Mbembe. It's just a really hard thing to document. If it does exist, you're not only dealing with the environment, you're dealing with this situation in which you're liable to be shot because it's like a constant civil war in these regions. And then you have to find a way to communicate with tribal people who usually don't have anyone amongst them who knows English. So you have to bring some sort of translator, and the translator is usually gonna be somebody from one of these towns along the river, which you probably need a translator in and of itself just to talk to them.
Yeah.
So the accessibility of this is a near zero.
It would take some serious resources and manpower to be able to make an expedition like that happen safely.